Here is a list of things a person can change about themselves in about 11 months, if they are serious, and if somebody is helping them. Hair, obviously. Color, length, the part. Weight, 40 pounds either direction if you're disciplined. Teeth. That one surprises people. Teeth are the most reliable identifier on a human body after fingerprints, and a dentist with a payment plan will rebuild your entire smile in under a year. Handwriting, slower, but learnable. There are people who teach it. Gait, harder. Physical therapists can retrain a walk if you tell them it's an old injury. A name, trivially. 3 of them if you know the counties where the clerk's office still uses paper. A face, at the edges. Nose, jaw, the hollows under the eyes. Enough that a photograph 9 years old stops matching a photograph today. Now here is the list of things a person cannot change, no matter who is helping them. It is 1 item long. The way they laugh. Not the voice moves. Not the accent can be sanded down. The laugh. The involuntary shape of it, the little intake before it, the 2-note fall at the end. It runs on plumbing older than your intentions. It is the only part of you that never got the memo. I'm Nathan, and the reason I want that in your head before we start is that this entire story turns on 4 seconds of sound over a fence, heard by a man who spent 31 years learning to identify people he was not permitted to look at. The Ridge Loop is 92 miles long, and it has 411 boxes on it, and Dustin Mortenson could drive the whole thing with the radio off and tell you where he was by the sound the gravel made under the tires. That is not a boast. It is what the job does to you. A rural carrier is not a delivery driver. A rural carrier is a man who visits 400 houses a day, 6 days a week, for years, and comes to know them the way a doctor knows a hand. The callus, the tremor, the thing that wasn't there last spring. Box 1118 is Alma Reddick, who leaves out a mason jar of cold tea in July and is offended if it comes back full. Box 203 is a mailbox that has been knocked flat by the same drunk in the same truck 4 times and is now welded to a length of railroad iron out of pure spite. Box 287 hasn't had a living resident since 2019, but still gets a seed catalog, and Dustin has never once thrown it away, because throwing away a piece of somebody's mail is the one unforgivable sin of the trade, and also a federal crime, and those 2 facts have never felt separate to him. He was 38. He drove a right-hand drive Jeep with 291,000 miles on it that he owned himself, because that is how a rural carrier works. The government rents your vehicle and your body and pays you a fixed evaluated hour, whether the day takes 6 hours or 11. He had been on the Ridge Loop for 3 years. Before that, he'd carried in town, out of the Tilford Post Office, in Winsome County, Missouri, population 9,400 if you count the hamlets, which the census does and the county commission doesn't. He had 2 things in this world that mattered, and one of them was a 7-year-old named Joy. Joy Mortenson had been born in a February ice storm, which her father considered the single most joy-like decision anyone had ever made. She was serious and loud in alternating layers. She was missing 4 teeth in a way that made her whistle her S's, and she had a system for the mail that had been running since she was 5. Every day, when Dustin got home, she got to be handed exactly 1 piece of their own mail, and she got to decide out loud whether it was boring, money, or something. The other thing that mattered was Tara. Dustin had met Tara Vantine 4.5 years earlier at a hardware store in Bolivar on a Saturday, in the aisle with the mailbox posts, which he would think about later with a kind of clinical nausea. She had been looking at a post. She had asked him whether the 4x4 or the pipe was better for a gravel shoulder, and he had given her the 11-minute answer, and she had listened to every second of it as if it were the most interesting thing anyone had said to her that year. She was 36. She said she had grown up in Illinois and moved down after a bad marriage. She had a brother, Ross, who drove long haul and came around at holidays with a cooler of shrimp and loud opinions about the Cardinals. She worked reception at a dental office 2 days a week and did the books for a landscaping outfit the other 3, and she was warm and funny and completely unbothered by the fact that Dustin's whole life was a road and a child. Joy was 2.5 when they met. Joy's mother had left when Joy was 11 months old and had not come back, and Dustin had spent 2 years running a house on 4 hours of sleep And when Tara Vantine stood in his kitchen at 7 in the morning one day and had already made the girls' lunch, he had felt something in his chest unclench that he had not known was clenched. They married 8 months after the hardware store, and about a year after that, over a Sunday dinner, Tara had said the thing that Dustin would eventually understand was the entire purpose of everything that came before it. She said, "Why don't you bid the Ridge?" He'd laughed. The Ridge Loop was the worst route in the office. 92 miles, gravel for 40 of it, 2 low-water crossings that flooded 4 times a year. It was the route the office made new people take, and everyone bid off of the second something better opened. "It's a longer day," he'd said. "It's a fixed day," she'd said. "It's evaluated at 8 and change, and everybody says it runs short. You'd be home before Joy's bus half the year," which was true, which was in fact a very good argument, and it is worth sitting with the fact that it was a good argument, because that is how the whole thing worked. Nobody ever asked Dustin Mortenson to do a single thing that was wrong. He bid the Ridge Loop in the spring. He got it on seniority. He had it 3 years, and in all 3 of those years, he never once opened a piece of mail, never once delayed one, never once looked twice at the 11 cluster box units strung along the northern half of the loop, or at the 2 farm addresses out past the second crossing that had no house standing on them anymore, but somehow still took delivery of priority parcels every couple of weeks. Why would he? Vacant properties get mail constantly. Estates, land trusts, hunting clubs. Half his route was addresses attached to nothing but a driveway and a lawyer. Bartholomew Stallworth moved into the house across the county road in the second week of April. He was 71, he was built like a fence post that had survived a truck, and he moved in with a U-Haul, 1 recliner, 41 boxes of books and a dog named Sergeant that was too old to care about anything. Dustin's read on him was, retired, widowed, moved to be near family. That read was correct. Stallworth had a daughter in Bolivar and a granddaughter starting kindergarten, and after his wife died in January, he had done the arithmetic that widowers do, and sold a house in a town 300 miles east where every single room had her in it. He waved. That's what Dustin remembered afterward, that for 3 straight weeks the man waved. Not friendly, exactly. Formal. He would be on his porch at 6:40 in the morning with coffee when Dustin backed the Jeep out, and he would lift one hand about 8 inches, and Dustin would lift one back, and that was the entire relationship. Joy asked once who the man across the road was. Dustin said, "I don't know yet." She said, "He has a very old dog." "He does. Old dogs are the best ones," Joy said, with total authority, and went back to her cereal. The 4th Saturday in April was warm, and the whole county was outside. Dustin was in the side yard fighting the mower. Joy was doing something violent and joyful with a hose. Tara came around the corner of the house carrying 2 glasses of iced tea, and Joy, who had been waiting, who had been strategizing. Who was 7 turned and hit her stepmother square in the chest with the hose at full pressure. There was a shriek, then a gasp, then Tara Mortenson laughed. It was not a big laugh, it was 4 seconds long. There was a small suck of air first, and then a run of 5 or 6 notes that dropped at the end, twice, like a stone skipping and stopping. Dustin looked up because it was a good sound. It was one of his favorite sounds. He had heard it 1,000 times. And across the county road, on his porch, Bartholomew Stallworth stood up out of his chair and did not move. Dustin noticed and didn't. That's the honest version. Some part of him clocked a man standing very suddenly 70 yards away, and the rest of him was wringing out a shirt and laughing at his daughter, and the moment folded up and went away. 2 hours later, Stallworth's truck was gone. It did not come back until after dark. The knock came at 9:20 that night. Joy was asleep. Tara was at the dental office's spring thing in Bolivar and had texted at 8 that she'd be late. Don't wait up. Dustin answered the door in a t-shirt with a dish towel over his shoulder, and Bartholomew Stallworth was standing on his porch with his hat in his hands like a man at a funeral. "Mr. Mortenson, Dustin's fine. Is anybody else in the house?" Dustin stopped smiling. "My daughter's asleep upstairs." "Your wife?" "Bolivar. Why?" The old man looked at the road for a second. Then he said, "Son, I need 11 minutes, and I need you to not ask me anything until I'm done. Can you do that?" "There are men who can make that request." and men who can't. Stallworth could. Dustin stepped back and let him in as far as the porch light, and the old man did not come inside, which Dustin would later understand was deliberate. He did not want to be a man who had been in that house. I worked 31 years behind walls, Stallworth said, 22 of them at Ovard Ridge, and the last 9 of those as warden. Do you know what a warden actually does all day? No. Paperwork and funerals. But the thing I got good at, the thing you get good at whether you want it or not, is people you are not permitted to look at. He turned his hat over. In a visiting room you don't stare. You can't. You'd start a riot. So for 31 years I identified human beings by sound. Gait on concrete, cough, and voices. Thousands of voices through a scratched-up piece of glass and a telephone handset that was built in 1974. Okay, said Dustin. I never forget a voice, Stallworth said. It is not a party trick, and it is not a gift, and I would give it back if I could. Now here is the question, and I need you to just answer it. When you met your wife, what name did she give you? Dustin said, Tara. Tara Vantine. Bartholomew Stallworth closed his eyes. He kept them closed for about 4 seconds, and when he opened them again, he was a different kind of old man. Not the formal neighbor. Something quieter, and much more frightening. All right, he said. That's it? That's your... Pack a bag for your daughter tonight. Dustin said. What? Pack a bag for your daughter. Enough for 4 days. Do not sleep in this house. Do not go to your mother's. Do not go to anybody your wife has met. And do not tell her I spoke to you. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not if she cries. Stallworth's voice did not rise at all. If you tell her one man knocked on your door, you and I are having a different conversation in about a week, and I will not be able to help you. You need to explain. I can't. Not here, not standing in the light on your porch, and not in a way you'd believe from a stranger you've waved at for 3 weeks. The old man reached into his jacket. So I'm going to give you the only thing I have. He took out a photograph and held it out over the porch railing. It was small and square, and the color had gone that particular dead orange that color prints go after 20 years in a drawer. It had been folded once and flattened out again, and it had a white border with a date printed on it by a machine. Dustin took it. It was a visiting room photograph. Every prison in America that still allows contact visits sells them. There's a corner of the room with a painted mural on the wall, a lake, a beach, a bad sunset, and a volunteer with a camera. And for $2, a family gets one 4x4 print to take home. It is the single most humane thing that happens in most of those buildings. This one had a mural of a lighthouse behind it, painted by somebody who had never seen the ocean. There were 2 people in the frame. On the right was a man in a chambray shirt, with a state number stenciled over the pocket. He was maybe 30. He had a wide, easy, completely likable face, and a gap in his front teeth, and he was laughing. Dustin knew him. He had eaten shrimp out of a cooler with that man in his own backyard 4 Julies in a row. That was Ross. That was Tara's brother, Ross Vantine. Long haul, opinions about the Cardinals. Sent Joy a stuffed catfish from Memphis for her 6th birthday. Ross Vantine, who had told Dustin, leaning on the tailgate, beer in hand, entirely relaxed, that he'd been driving over the road since he was 22 and had put 4 million miles on. On the left of the frame was a young woman. Her hair was black instead of brown and cut short, and her face was thinner through the jaw, and she was 20 pounds lighter, and she was 19 or 20 years younger, and it took Dustin Mortenson somewhere between 1 and 2 full seconds to be certain. She had her head tipped back, her mouth was open. She had been caught mid-laugh, and even in a bad orange photograph you could see the shape of it, the little intake, and then the fall. The white border had a date printed on it in machine type, 04/12, and on the back, in grease pencil, in somebody's careful block capitals, Robin. Visit #41, RV. Her name, said Bartholomew Stallworth from the dark side of the porch light, was Robin. That is not a name she was born with either, and she came into my visiting room under 9 different last names on the approved visitor lists of 11 different men for 6 years. Dustin heard himself say, "That's her brother." "I know exactly who that is," Stallworth said. "He did 19 years of a 22 to life at Ovard Ridge, and he walked out on parole 3 years ago this March. 3 years ago this March. The Ridge Loop had come open in April. Dustin Mortenson stood on his own porch holding a photograph in both hands and felt the floor of his life quietly slide 4 inches to the left. "Pack the bag," Stallworth said. Dustin did. He would be proud of exactly one decision in this entire story, and it was that one. That he did not argue, and he did not call his wife, and he did not go upstairs and think about it. He put 4 days of Joy's clothes in a duffel. He got her toothbrush, and her inhaler, and the flat gray elephant she'd had since she was 1, and was extremely defensive about still owning. He put his own boots and 2 uniform shirts in a grocery sack. Then he went into the office off the kitchen and took a thing out of the closet that he had not thought about in 2 years, which was a metal document box with his discharge papers and Joy's birth certificate and her social security card, and he put that in the sack too, and he could not have told you why. He woke her at 10:40. "Are we going somewhere?" "We're going on a trip." Joy Mortenson considered this. She was 7, and it was a school night, and both of those things were negotiating positions. Is it a fun trip or a hospital trip? "It's a fun trip," her father lied. He carried her out the back door, through the kitchen and past the mudroom, because the front porch light was on and faced the road, and he put her in the Jeep in her pajamas with a blanket, and he backed out with the headlights off and did not turn them on until he was past the mailbox. Bartholomew Stallworth's porch was dark. The old man was standing on it anyway. Dustin could see the shape of him against the door. He drove 70 minutes on state highways he'd never carried, and he did not stop at the first motel or the second. And somewhere on the far side of the 3rd county line, he realized his right hand was cramped because he had been gripping the photograph against the steering wheel the entire way. The motel was outside Marshfield and cost $51 and had a parking lot he could see from the bed. Joy fell asleep in 8 minutes. Dustin Mortenson sat on the floor with his back against the door for the rest of the night, and at about 4 in the morning, he did the only piece of investigation available to a man with a phone and no idea what he was looking for. He searched his wife's name. Nothing. He searched Ross Vantine. Nothing but a Facebook page with 11 photos on it, all of them from the last 3 years. Then he searched Ovard Ridge Correctional and Vantine. And the 4th result was a Springfield newspaper archive from 19 years ago, and the headline was, "State's Case Collapses. As Witness Family Relocates. 2 Acquitted." He read it 4 times. He did not understand most of it, but he understood the last paragraph, which said that a 19-year-old named Corey Pinkney had testified before a grand jury, and then, before trial, his mother and his 14-year-old sister had been found. That was the word the paper used. Found. At an address that had never been published anywhere, and the family had withdrawn, and the case had died. Dustin was still looking at that paragraph when the sun came up. At 8:15, he called the Tilford post office and told Postmaster Doug Hensarling he had a family emergency and needed 2 days. Hensarling, who had known him 11 years, said take 3. At 9:30, he called Bartholomew Stallworth from a gas station and said, "Tell me the rest." They met at a Hardee's in Bolivar because Stallworth said, "Any conversation worth having should be had somewhere with too many witnesses and terrible coffee." Joy sat 2 booths down with a biscuit and a coloring sheet and the dog. Stallworth had brought the dog, and the dog had immediately laid down on Joy's feet, and that had solved the entire childcare problem in 4 seconds. "I'm going to tell you what I know," Stallworth said, "and then I'm going to tell you what I think, and I want you to keep those in 2 separate boxes, because I have watched men ruin their lives by letting the second one wear the clothes of the first. Okay? What I know." The old man set both hands flat on the table. "Ovard Ridge holds about 1,800 men. Some of them are running things on the outside. That is not a scandal. That's Tuesday. The question is never whether, it's how. And the answer is always the same, in every facility in this country, and it is the least glamorous answer imaginable. Which is? A channel, said Stallworth. Something that goes in and out of that building every single day, legitimately, that nobody inspects, because inspecting it would break something everybody needs. He held up fingers. Lawyers. Legal mail cannot be read. That's the Constitution. And it works. And it's the first thing they burn out. Chaplains. Good people. And they get used. Food service contractors. Medical transport. And visitors. Visitors are searched. Visitors are searched for. Objects. Stallworth said, "Nobody has ever invented a way to search a person for a sentence." He tapped the table twice. The most valuable asset in a prison economy is not a phone, and it is not dope. It is a reliable, disciplined, unrecorded human being on the outside who will carry an exact set of words from a man inside to somebody who has never met him and bring an exact set of words back, correctly, every time, for years, without ever writing anything down. And that was her. That was Robin. Stallworth said the name flatly. I never once caught her doing anything. Understand that. I could not have written her up for spitting on the floor. She followed every rule in the building. Dressed right, arrived early, never late, never argued, never brought a thing in, never took a thing out. 9 last names over 6 years, and every one of them was a real, valid identity, with a real driver's license behind it. She was on 11 different men's lists as a cousin, a fiancé, a half-sister. How did you know then? Because I did the only thing a warden can actually do, which is sit in a room and read a list. The old man's mouth moved. In 2007, I started keeping my own paper. Who visits who, and when. And there was a pattern in it that had no business existing. Every time a certain kind of thing happened on the outside, a witness got cold feet, a co-defendant changed his story, a girlfriend suddenly recanted. If you walked it backwards 11 to 16 days, there was a visit. Not always the same inmate, always the same woman. Dustin said, "You told somebody." "I told everybody," said Bartholomew Stallworth. "I told the department. I told the state police. In 2009, I told a prosecutor in Springfield who was building a case against a man named Orrin Gaddis, and I gave him 9 names and 6 years of visit logs, and he was very interested indeed. And in March of 2009, the mother and the little sister of the boy who was going to testify were found. At a relocation address that 11 people in the state of Missouri knew." Stallworth looked out the window. "They were not killed. I want to be accurate with you. Somebody rang the doorbell at 2:15 in the morning and stood there for a while and then went away. And the next morning, there was a photograph of that 14-year-old girl standing at her new school in an envelope in the mailbox. That was all. That was the entire crime. There is no statute you can charge that under. Jesus." The family withdrew inside 4 days. 2 men walked, and Robin stopped coming to my prison, and I never heard that voice again for 19 years. He picked up his coffee and put it back down without drinking it. Until Saturday, over a fence, in a yard. 70 yards from a 7-year-old girl. Dustin Mortenson said, very quietly, "That's what you know. What do you think?" And Bartholomew Stallworth said, "I think somebody like that doesn't retire. I think she went where the work is. And I think, son, that you need to tell me what you do for a living, because I have been sitting here for 20 minutes, waiting for you to say it, and you haven't." Dustin said, "I'm a mail carrier." The old man shut his eyes again. "Rural route," Dustin said. 92 miles. 411 boxes. Whose idea was the route?" And Dustin Mortenson heard his own wife's voice, warm and reasonable, over a Sunday dinner 3 years ago, saying, "Why don't you bid the ridge?" And he put both hands flat on a Hardee's table and discovered he could not immediately make them stop shaking. Here is what a rural mail route is, told properly, because you cannot understand what was done to Dustin Mortenson until you understand what he was. Every morning at 6:50 he walked into a building where 411 addresses were already sorted into a case, in the exact order he would drive them, and he pulled that case down into trays, and he loaded the trays into the Jeep in sequence, and then for the next 7 to 9 hours he was the only representative of the federal government that most of those people would see all year. He carried a scanner. Every carrier does. It is a battered orange handheld that looks like it was designed in 2004. And it is, without exaggeration, one of the most complete surveillance devices any American working man carries, except that the thing it surveils is him. It logs the moment he leaves the office. It pings GPS on a schedule. Every accountable piece, every certified letter, every signature required, every priority parcel gets scanned at the point of delivery, and that scan carries a timestamp and a coordinate and his employee number, and the whole record uploads to a national database and lives there. He had never once thought of this as a record of anything. It was a record of him. And he had nothing to hide, so it was furniture. He thought about the cluster boxes on the drive back to Marshfield. 11 CBUs strung along the northern half of the loop, up where the county road turns to gravel and the ridge starts. 16 doors each. They'd gone in about 7 years ago when a developer platted some 10-acre lots and then went bust, and about a third of the doors had ever had a name in them. And then out past the second low-water crossing, 2 farm addresses, 14411 and 14425 County Road AA, that had no house on them. 14411 had a foundation and a standpipe. 14425 had a barn with half a roof. They got parcels. Not many. 2 or 3 every couple of weeks. Priority mail. Flat-rate boxes and padded envelopes. Correctly addressed. Correctly postaged. Nothing about them was wrong. There is no rule that says a parcel must go to a house. He put them in the parcel lockers at the CBU nearest the turn, exactly as he was supposed to, and scanned them, exactly as he was supposed to, and drove on. He had done that, by his own rough count, somewhere north of 200 times. Names, Stallworth said, in the Hardee's parking lot. What names are on them? And Dustin Mortenson stood in the sun and realized he did not need to look it up. He had been reading names for 11 years. Names went into him and stayed, and he could see the label of the last one, 4 days ago, a white thermal label on a padded envelope, and it had said, Miss J. Mortenson, 14425 Co. Road, AA Tilford, Mo 475724. He didn't say anything for a while. Stallworth said, Son, it's got my daughter's name on it. The old man took hold of the truck bed with one hand, which Dustin realized later was the closest Bartholomew Stallworth ever came, in the entire time he knew him, to needing something to hold. How long? I don't know. 2 years? More? Dustin's voice had gone strange and flat. It's a common name, Mortenson. There's 4 Mortensons on that route. My grandfather had ground out there. I assumed it was a cousin. Did you ever hold one? I hold all of them. I scan them and I put them in the locker. That's not what I asked. Did you ever hold one and... Look. At it? Dustin said, Yes, once. Last winter. It was addressed to J. Mortenson, and it had a little sticker on it, a cartoon fox, and I remember thinking that's a kid's package, and then I put it in the locker, and I drove on, because it wasn't mine. He looked up. Why my daughter's name? Because she doesn't have one, said Stallworth. What? A record. She's 7. She has a social security number, and a birth certificate, and a school enrollment, and nothing else in the entire world. The old man's voice was very careful now, the way you are careful with a man holding a live wire. Every system that flags anything flags. History. A name with no history is not suspicious. It is invisible. And if that name is on the parcel, and the parcel gets opened by somebody it shouldn't, then the person on the paperwork is a minor child who cannot be charged, cannot be interviewed without a guardian, and whose guardian is the woman who set it up. She's a firewall. Dustin said, She's a firewall, said Bartholomew Stallworth, and so are you. They came back on Wednesday. That was Stallworth's call, and it was the correct one, and it is the reason this story ends the way it does, instead of the other way. You go back, he'd said. You go to work Thursday. You do your route the way you have done it every day of your life. You do not look at a cluster box any differently. You do not slow down at AA. You are the dullest man in Missouri. You want me to keep delivering it. I want you to change nothing. Stallworth said, You understand what happens the first day you change something? She's been living with you for 4.5 years. She will know inside an hour. And then you and I are back to the doorbell at 2:15 in the morning. Except this time, it will be your porch. And Joy? Joy goes to school and comes home and has a completely normal week, because a child who suddenly stops going to school is the loudest possible alarm you could pull. Dustin said, You are asking me to put my daughter back in that house. I am, said the old man. And I want you to understand that I know exactly what I'm asking, because I have been the man who asked it before, and I have been wrong before, and there is a woman in Kansas who does not speak to me. He met Dustin's eyes. You've got 4 days of moving her that you have to explain now. So you get out ahead of it. You had a fight with your wife about money and you took the girl to a motel and you're embarrassed about it. That's the story? That's the story, and it's a good one, because it's small and stupid, and it makes you look weak, and people believe stories that make the teller look weak. They got home Wednesday at 5:40 in the afternoon. Tara came out of the house before he was out of the Jeep. She had been crying. She had, Dustin was sure, genuinely been crying, and she hugged Joy for a long time in the driveway, and she said, "Don't you ever do that to me again." Into his shirt, and she smelled like her shampoo and her hands were shaking. And Dustin Mortenson stood in his own driveway with his arms around a woman he had been married to for 3 years and 11 months and gave the performance of his life. He said he was sorry. He said the thing about the money. He said he'd been an idiot. She said, "Where did you go?" And he said, "Marshfield. There's a motel by the Caseys." He watched her file it. That was the moment he stopped being a husband, permanently. Not the photograph, not the porch, not the newspaper archive. It was watching a woman he loved receive a piece of information and put it away somewhere for later. She said, "You could have called." He said, "I know." She said, "Do you want a beer?" And he said, "Yeah." And they sat on the back step while Joy ran a chalk operation of some kind on the patio. And it was one of the nicest evenings of his life. And he understood that too, and it did not make it stop being nice. At 7:20, she said, entirely in passing, entirely warm, "Oh, don't wait on me for dinner Thursday. The office thing runs late." Dustin said, "Okay." He went inside and wrote it in a spiral notebook he had bought at a Casey's in Marshfield for 99 cents. APR 30, 7:20 p.m. Don't wait on me for dinner Thursday. And then he went out to the Jeep and got the scanner charging cradle and looked at it for a while, sitting on the seat, the ugly orange thing he'd carried for 11 years. 2 days later, at the post office, he asked Doug Henserling a question he had never had a reason to ask. "How far back does my scan history go?" Henserling looked up over his glasses. Doug Henserling was 59 and had run the Tilford office for 16 years and had the specific weary competence of a man who has personally fixed every piece of equipment in a building twice. Yours? Forever. Well, it's on the national system. Why? Somebody said a parcel didn't get delivered. Then it got delivered. Henserling said, "Because you're the only carrier I've got that scans everything at the point instead of at the truck, which drives the district crazy because it makes everybody else's numbers look bad." Dustin said, "Can I pull it?" "You can look at your own. There's a report." Henserling took his glasses off. "Dustin, is something wrong?" And here is where Dustin Mortenson made the second good decision of the story. He said, "Yes, and I'm not going to tell you what, and I need you to not ask me, and I need you to remember that I asked you this on a Friday." Doug Henserling put his glasses back on and looked at him for about 6 seconds. Then he said, "Friday the 2nd of May. You asked me at 9:40 in the morning. I wrote it on my desk calendar." Which is how Dustin Mortenson learned that in a small building, in a small county, an ordinary 60-year-old man will occasionally do something quietly magnificent without changing his facial expression at all. The report is called a scan event history, and it is not designed for human beings. It came out as a spreadsheet with 41,000 rows in it, 1 line per accountable piece Dustin Mortenson had scanned in 3 years on the Ridge Loop, and every line had a piece number, a date, a time to the second, a latitude, a longitude, and a 2-letter event code. He printed the first 200 pages at the library in Bolivar because he did not want it on a printer in his house, and it cost him $22, and the librarian gave him a look. Then he sat at a table with a highlighter for 9 hours across 2 Sundays and did the only piece of detective work he was actually qualified for, which was reading his own handwriting. He pulled every scan at the 2 AA addresses and the 11 cluster units on the north half. There were 206 of them in 3 years. He built a second list from the spiral notebook, but the notebook only went back to April 30th, so for the older ones he did something better. He went to his own phone and pulled 3 years of text messages from his wife, because Tara Mortenson had never once in 4.5 years called him during his route. She texted. She always texted. She said it was because she didn't want to make him pull over. And that is how Dustin Mortenson discovered that his wife had sent him 194 messages in 3 years that contained a variation of the same 11 words. Don't wait on me for dinner Thursday. Don't hold dinner tomorrow. The office thing runs late. Don't wait up. Going to mom's after. Never on the day, always the day before, or 2 days before. Never a specific time. Never anything you could point at. He laid the 2 lists side by side on a library table. Of the 206 parcel scans at those addresses, 189 of them fell within 48 hours of one of those messages. 92%. And of the 17 that didn't, 11 were in a single stretch in February of the previous year, which was the 2 weeks Tara had been in Illinois for her aunt's funeral. Dustin sat back in a plastic chair in the Bolivar Branch Library and understood, completely and finally, that the woman who packed his daughter's lunch had been telling him when to be somewhere for 3 years, and that he had thanked her for it every time. That is not a metaphor. He had said thank you. He had said, "Thanks for the heads up, babe." He did not go to the sheriff. Bartholomew Stallworth had been extremely clear on this point, and his reason was not what Dustin expected. It was not that the sheriff was crooked. Winsome County's sheriff, as far as anybody knew, was a decent and unimaginative man. It's that he can't hold it, Stallworth said. You give a county sheriff a thing this size and inside 72 hours he has told the prosecutor, who has told his investigator, who has told his wife, and there are now 9 people in a town of 9,000 who know. That's how the Pinckneys got found. Not treachery. Volume. Then who? The old man took a card out of his wallet. It was creased soft, and it was 19 years old. Postal Inspection Service, he said. You are not a mail carrier who found a crime, son. You are a crime that is already in the mail. And that makes it theirs. And they are the oldest federal law enforcement agency in this country, and almost nobody has ever heard of them, which is exactly what you want. Why do you have that card? Because in 2009, I gave the same information to 7 agencies, said Bartholomew Stallworth, and that is the only one that ever wrote me back. Inspector Kim Northcutt drove down from Kansas City in an unremarkable sedan and met them in the Bolivar Hardee's, which by then had become the unofficial headquarters of the entire operation. She was 44, wore a blazer over a golf shirt, and had the specific unhurried manner of a person who has been lied to professionally for 2 decades and has stopped taking it personally. She let Dustin talk for 26 minutes without interrupting once. Then she said, "Mr. Mortenson, I need to say 3 things to you, and then I need you to say yes or no to each one. Okay. 1. You have not committed a crime. You delivered correctly addressed, correctly postaged mail to the delivery point on the address. That is your job. Whatever is in those parcels, you are the least culpable person in the state of Missouri." She let that sit for a second. I say that first because I've watched people spend 6 months not calling us because they thought they were already in it. Dustin's throat did something. He said, "Okay. 2. From this minute, you do not open, delay, divert, weigh, photograph, hold up to a light, or touch differently a single piece of mail on that route. Not one. If you do, even once, even with the best intentions in the world, you commit a federal felony, you become impeachable as a witness, and every parcel you ever handled becomes inadmissible garbage. Do you understand that?" "Yes." 3. Inspector Northcutt folded her hands. "This will take months, not weeks. And for all of those months you will go home to that house and eat dinner with that woman, and you will not be able to change your face. Some people can do that. Most cannot. And there is no shame in the second group. But I need to know which one you are before I spend the government's money." Dustin Mortenson thought about a padded envelope with a cartoon fox sticker on it, addressed to Miss J. Mortenson. He said, "I can do it. What the Postal Inspection Service can do, it turns out is remarkable, and almost none of it is what people imagine." They did not open anything. Opening sealed first-class or priority mail requires a federal search warrant supported by probable cause, and Northcutt was not going to burn the case on a weak one. What they did instead was a mail cover. A mail cover is a legal order to record the outside of mail going to an address, sender, return address, postmark, class, weight, dimensions, without opening it. It has been legal since before the Civil War, and it needs no warrant, because the exterior of an envelope moving through a public system has no expectation of privacy. It is the quietest tool in federal law enforcement. They put covers on both AA addresses and on 9 of the 11 cluster units. And within 5 weeks, the shape came up out of the fog like a boat. The parcels came from 28 different return addresses in 11 states, and every single one of them was a real business with a real storefront. A print shop in Tulsa, a bait store in Belton, a nail salon in Little Rock. Each one had a family member of a man at Ovard Ridge on the payroll. The parcels contained, and they eventually knew this from 3 controlled deliveries with warrants, much later, 3 things. Prepaid debit cards, loaded, in blister packs, indistinguishable from a Christmas gift. Cell phones, the cheap flip kind, 4 to a box, wrapped in fabric softener sheets. And paper. The paper is the part that made Inspector Kim Northcutt, a 22-year federal agent, put her pen down on a Hardee's table. Printouts, ordinary home printer paper, names, dates of birth, home addresses, employers, school districts, vehicle descriptions, and the times a person left the house. They were not victims. They were not enemies. They were witnesses. There's a market, Northcutt said. It has existed for as long as there have been trials. A man inside needs to know where somebody went, and there is always somebody outside who will find out for money. Disses. What is different here is the industrialization of it. This isn't one guy paying his cousin to drive past a house. This is a supply chain with a distribution route. My route, Dustin said. Your route is the last mile, she said. Every part of the chain before you is anonymous. A print shop, a postage meter, a barcode. The dangerous mile is the one where a human being has to physically put an object into a specific box in a specific county. That is where every one of these things dies. So they solved it. By marrying a carrier. By making a carrier, Inspector Northcutt said. You don't recruit a mail carrier. Carriers are bonded. They're screened. They're proud. And they turn you in. You acquire. 1. You find a decent widower with a small child on a route you don't want. You spend 4 years being the best thing that ever happened to him. And then, at exactly the right moment, you suggest a route bid, gently, once, and never bring it up again. Dustin said, and the name on the parcels. Northcutt was quiet. Then she said, Mr. Mortenson, I have been doing this a long time, and I want to be honest with you, rather than kind. Your daughter's name being on those labels is not incidental, and it is not cruelty. It is insurance. If this had ever come apart in a way they couldn't control, the paperwork would have pointed at a child, and behind the child, at you. They were going to hang it on me. They built a man to hang it on, she said, 4.5 years ago, in a hardware store. Tara Mortenson's real name was Roberta Ann Cleaves, and she was born in Cairo, Illinois, in a year the state of Missouri would eventually have to prove with a hospital footprint card. She was the 3rd of 5 and the only one who got out, and she got out at 17 by discovering the thing she was extraordinary at, which was being trusted quickly by strangers. That is a talent. It is worth stating plainly, because people want their villains to be stupid or cruel or obviously wrong, and she was none of those things. Roberta Cleaves was warm. She remembered names. She asked the second question, the one after the polite one. She was the person at a party you told about your mother. Her brother Ross went inside at 31 for a thing he did in a parking lot in East St. Louis that was much worse than the version of it he told at barbecues, and she started visiting. And inside 18 months she had worked out the economy of a prison visiting room the way some people work out a card game after watching Two Hands. She was never in a gang. She never took an order from anyone. She was a contractor. The most reliable one in 3 states. And by 24, she was carrying words for men who had never met each other, at $400 a message, and she was very good at it, because she had one rule that nobody else had. She never lied to the men inside, ever, about anything, not once in 19 years. If a message could not be delivered, she said so. If somebody's girlfriend had moved on, she said so, and she took the consequences of saying so. That was the whole business. In a world made entirely of liars, she was the one fixed point, and that is why 11 men put 9 different women who were all her on their visitor lists. After Bartholomew Stallworth started keeping his private log, and after the Pinckney family withdrew and 2 men walked free and the heat came up, Roberta Cleves stopped visiting anybody and went dark for 11 years. She waitressed. She did books for a lawn company. She was, for over a decade, a completely ordinary woman in southern Illinois, and if she had stayed that way, there would be no story here. Then Ross came up for parole, and a network that had been running messages on 19th century infrastructure, a woman in a car, needed something that scaled. Something that ran 6 days a week to 400 addresses in 3 counties with a federal shield in front of it. Somebody had to build the last mile. She found Dustin Mortenson the way you would find anything. She looked. She read the Winsome County Carrier bid postings, which are public. She read an obituary and a school newsletter. She spent 11 weeks establishing that there was a 34-year-old rural carrier in Tilford whose wife had left, who had a toddler, who had 11 years of seniority, who would be in a position to bid the Ridge Loop when old Ray Beecham retired in 3 years, and who, this was the part that took the longest to verify, had never in his life been written up for anything. Then she went and stood in the aisle with the mailbox posts on a Saturday. Bartholomew Stallworth said one thing about her, near the end, that Dustin never got out of his head. He said, "The horror of that woman is not that she faked it, it's that she didn't have to." The autumn was the worst part. Dustin Mortenson delivered his route every day from May to November. He put parcels in the lockers at the AA turn, and he scanned them at the point, the way he always had, and he drove home and ate dinner with his wife, and read to his daughter, and once a week he met a federal agent in a car, in a church lot, in 3 different counties, on a rotating schedule, and told her nothing that wasn't already true. He got very thin. His hands hurt from gripping the wheel. Twice he came close to breaking. The first was in August, when Joy got a fever of 104, and Tara sat up with her all night doing cool cloths and singing the same 4 songs, and at 4 a.m., Dustin stood in the hallway and watched his wife hold his daughter and had to physically leave the house. The second was in October, when a man he'd never seen before was parked at the second low-water crossing 3 days running, and on the 3rd day the man got out of the car and asked, pleasantly, whether the crossing flooded much, and Dustin said 4 times a year, and the man said thanks and drove off. Kim Northcutt ran the plate. It came back to a leasing company. The face came back, eventually, to Orrin Gaddis, who was 56 years old and had never been convicted of anything. "He's checking the route," Northcutt said. "He's checking me." "He's checking the route," she said again, in a way that Dustin understood was a kindness rather than a correction. They pulled Bartholomew Stallworth out in November. Not because anything happened, because Northcutt looked at the arithmetic, a 71-year-old man alone in a house across the road from the target, and said no, and the old man argued for about 4 minutes, and then, to his enormous credit, stopped arguing. He went to his daughters in Bolivar. He took the dog. Joy cried about the dog for 2 days, which Dustin found he could not comfort her about, because the honest answer was, "I sent the dog away because I am afraid of your stepmother." And there is no version of that a 7-year-old can hold. The parcel came in the first week of December. Northcutt called Dustin at 6:15 in the morning while he was casing his route and said one sentence, "There's a big one coming Thursday." It had entered the mail stream in Tulsa on Monday. It was a padded flat-rate envelope, and because there was now a mail cover on both AA addresses, the inspection service knew its exterior before it was within 400 miles of Winsome County. The label read, "Miss J. Mortenson, 14425 Co. Road, AA Tilford Mo, 65724. On Tuesday night, at 7:20, Dustin's wife looked up from the stove and said, "Oh, don't wait on me for dinner Thursday. The office thing runs late." He wrote it in the notebook. It was entry number 38. Then he went upstairs and sat on the edge of his daughter's bed for a while in the dark. Thursday the 11th of December was clear and about 29 degrees, and Dustin Mortenson started his route at 7:06 in the morning, 4 minutes early, which was the only unusual thing he did all day, and he did it because he could not sit still. The envelope was in his parcel tray at position 341. He did not touch it differently. He did not look at it in the truck. He ran the whole southern half of the loop first, exactly as always, and he was at box 118 at 9:40, and Alma Reddick was not out, because it was December, and he was at the first crossing at 10:52. At 11:17 he turned onto County Road AA. There was nothing at the second crossing. There was nothing at 14,411. The morning was completely empty in every direction, the way that country is in December, and Dustin Mortenson pulled up at the cluster unit at the turn and put the truck in park. Here is what he did. He got out. He opened the parcel locker with his arrow key. He put a padded flat-rate envelope addressed to Miss J. Mortenson into locker 3. He closed it. He took the locker key and put it in the mailbox for 14,425. He raised the scanner, put the crosshair on the barcode, and pressed the trigger. The scanner beeped once. Somewhere in a data center, a row was written. Piece number, event code DL, 11:19:04 a.m., latitude 37.6, longitude -93.2, carrier employee number. Then he got back in the Jeep and drove the rest of his route, all 40 of the remaining boxes, and he finished at 3:48 in the afternoon and drove home and made his daughter macaroni. He never saw a single agent. That is the part he tells people who ask. He never saw a car, a van, a person, a camera, a helicopter, nothing. He put a package in a box in an empty county and drove away. At 4:41 that afternoon, a gray pickup came down County Road AA, and a man got out and opened the mailbox at 14425, and took the locker key and opened locker 3 and removed a padded envelope, and he did it in 11 seconds, because he had done it 200 times. He was arrested in the parking lot of a Casey's in Fairplay, Missouri, 40 minutes later, with the envelope unopened on the passenger seat, which mattered enormously, because it meant the federal warrant was executed on a sealed parcel in the possession of a man who had no address on it and no explanation for having it. His name was Orrin Gaddis. Inside the envelope were 9 prepaid cards with a combined load of $11,200, 4 flip phones, and 11 pages of home printer paper. The pages had 6 names on them. 4 of them were the family members of a man who was, at that moment, 11 days out from testifying in a federal courtroom in Springfield about a homicide in a motel parking lot in 2021. One of those names belonged to a 9-year-old. They arrested Roberta Cleaves at 6:50 that evening, in the parking lot of a dental office in Bolivar, where she was in fact at an office thing, because she had never once told Dustin Mortenson a lie that could be checked. Dustin Mortenson found out about the arrests the way a witness is supposed to, which is that nobody told him anything for 4 hours. At 8:55 that night, Kim Northcutt knocked on his door and said, "It's done, and your daughter needs to not be in this house tomorrow, and here is why." The why was that they had taken 11 people that afternoon across 4 states, and that the men at Ovard Ridge would know by lockdown, and that for about 72 hours there would be a period in which a great many extremely angry people would be trying to work out which piece of the machine had broken. "They'll work it out," Dustin said. "They will," Northcutt agreed. "In about a week, they'll work out that it was a mail cover, and then they'll work out that a mail cover means a carrier talked. And then, Mr. Mortenson, you will be the most obvious man in the state of Missouri. So what do? You keep carrying the mail," said Inspector Kim Northcutt, "and we make you not worth it." That last part is the piece of this story that people find hardest to believe, and it is the truest thing in it. There was no safe house. There was no new identity, no marshal in a windbreaker, no cross-country drive at night. 99% of what the federal government did to protect Dustin and Joy Mortenson consisted of paperwork, and it worked better than a bodyguard would have. They took the girl's name off everything. Her school records were sealed under a state statute nobody in Winsome County had used in 11 years. Her social security number was flagged. The addresses at AA were condemned by the county at the inspection service's request, which sounds petty, and was in fact the single most effective thing anyone did, because a condemned parcel is a returned parcel, and a returned parcel is a dead route. And then they did the thing that ended it. They put it in the indictment. Not the carrier's name. The carrier is a protected witness. What went into the indictment? In plain language, in a public federal charging document that every man at Ovard Ridge would eventually read, was that the network's last mile had been identified through a Mail cover initiated on the basis of an anomaly in national scan data. Which was true. It was not the whole truth, and it was not a lie, and it did something no amount of security could have done. It told 1,800 men that the thing that had killed them was a machine. Revenge on a computer is not satisfying, Northcutt said, in the car outside the courthouse. That's the whole trick. You can't stab a database. Roberta Ann Cleaves was charged in the Western District of Missouri with conspiracy to commit witness tampering, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and 11 counts of using the mail in furtherance of a crime of violence. She pled guilty in the following August rather than let it go to trial, which surprised everybody except Bartholomew Stallworth, who said, "Of course she did. She's never lied to any of them. She's not going to start by making them sit through a trial where a warden reads out 9 of her names. She got 210 months. Ross Vantine, whose name was actually Ross Cleaves, which meant that the one thing in that family Dustin had never questioned, was also false, went back inside on the parole violation before the federal case was even indicted, and then got another 156 months on top. Orrin Gaddis, who had never been convicted of anything in 56 years, was convicted of everything. 11 other people took pleas across 4 states, including the woman who ran the print shop in Tulsa, and a corrections officer at Ovard Ridge named Rundle, who had been carrying nothing more serious than dates out of the building for 6 years and had convinced himself that dates were not information. And in the second week of the trial in Springfield, an old man in a good suit that no longer fit him was sworn in and asked to state his name and former occupation for the record. And Bartholomew Stallworth said, "Bartholomew Stallworth, I was the warden at Ovard Ridge Correctional Facility for 9 years, and a corrections officer for 22 before that." Defense counsel spent an hour and 10 minutes trying to establish that a man cannot identify a person by the sound of a laugh. They were not wrong to try. It is, standing alone, worth almost nothing in a courtroom, which is why the government did not use it for that. Stallworth was not there to identify anybody. He was there to authenticate 19 years of his own handwritten visitor logs, a warden's private paper, kept contemporaneously, in a hand a jury could see was the same in 2004 and 2009, and to explain what he had noticed in it, and who he had told, and when. The laugh did not convict anyone. The laugh was the reason a 71-year-old man stood up out of a chair on a porch on a Saturday in April. And everything else in this story is downstream of that. And there is not a single sentence of it in the trial record. Corey Pinckney was 38 by then. He had not spoken to law enforcement in 19 years. Kim Northcutt drove to Cape Girardeau and sat in his kitchen and told him what had happened, and he listened to all of it without saying anything. And at the end he asked exactly one question, which was whether his sister's name had been on a piece of paper in a mailbox. Northcutt said, "In 2009? Almost certainly. We can't prove it." And Corey Pinckney said, "Okay." And that was the entire conversation. He came to the sentencing. He did not give a statement. He sat in the 3rd row in a jacket and he watched. And when it was over, he shook Dustin Mortenson's hand in the hallway. And neither man could think of a thing to say. So they just did that for a second and let go. Dustin carried the Ridge Loop for 4 more months. He had assumed he would quit. He had assumed the road would be ruined. And what happened instead was that he drove out past the second crossing one morning in March and found that 14425 was a bulldozed foundation and a survey stake, and that Box 118 still wanted its seed catalog, and that Alma Reddick had put a mason jar out early that year because it was warm. He bid off in April, but not out of fear. He bid off because Doug Henserling retired and Dustin Mortenson, at 39, applied for the postmaster's job in a town of 9,400 and got it. Joy is 11 now. She still does the mail. She does it with more editorial severity than she used to. The categories are now boring, money, something, and junk, and she is ruthless about the 4th one. She knows a version of what happened. Not all of it. She knows her stepmother did something illegal and went to prison and is not coming back, and she knows her father had to help the police, and she knows that the old man across the road is the reason. What she does not know, and will not until she is much older, is that for 2 years, her name was printed on a label on a padded envelope, and that somebody she trusted put it there on purpose. Dustin has thought about how he'll tell her. He has a version in his head. He is in no hurry. Bartholomew Stallworth died in the spring, at 74, of an ordinary heart in an ordinary bed, in his daughter's house in Bolivar. He had come back to Tilford exactly twice, both times for a birthday. The second time he brought Joy a book about lighthouses, which Dustin found difficult and did not comment on. His daughter gave Dustin the dog, who was by then approximately 900 years old, and who promptly claimed the good rug and held it for another 18 months. And in the folder of things Stallworth left with a note that said, "Give these to the mail carrier," there were 19 years of visitor logs in a hand that never changed, 3 commendations he had never framed, and a small square photograph with a lighthouse painted on the wall behind 2 people, one of whom was laughing. There was a sticky note on the front of it. It said, "You'll want to keep this, not for what it shows, for what it took to notice it." There's a thing I have been chewing on since I first read this one, and it isn't the wife. Roberta Cleaves is a solved problem. She is a professional who was extremely good at a repulsive job, and the machinery of the federal government eventually did what it is for, and she will be 61 when she gets out. Fine. Nothing to learn there except that competence is not a virtue. What I keep coming back to is the bid. 1 sentence. Over a Sunday dinner. Why don't you bid the ridge? It was a good idea. That's what gets me. It was a genuinely good idea. Shorter effective day. Home before the school bus. Better for the kid. If you or I had a spouse who said that to us, we would say, that's a fair point. And we would go and do it. And we would be right to. Nobody ever asked Dustin Mortenson to do one wrong thing. Not once, in 3 years. Every single act in this entire operation, performed by him, was correct. He was, the entire time, the best carrier in that office. And the reason they chose him was that he was the best carrier in that office. His integrity was not an obstacle to the scheme. It was the load-bearing wall. So here's what I want you to actually do with this, and it isn't be suspicious of your spouse, because that is a rotten way to live, and I'm not going to hand it to you. Look at your routine, not your money, not your passwords, your routine. The boring, repeating, uninspected access you have because of what you do, the badge that opens a door at 6 a.m., the delivery you sign for, the system you have read-only rights to, the fact that nobody ever checks your van, the fact that people wave you through. Every one of us has one. It is invisible to us precisely because it is ours. Now ask the ugly question. What is that worth to somebody who cannot get it any other way? Because if the answer is quite a lot, then understand what you actually are. You are not the target. You are the door. And a door does not get broken down by professionals. A door gets married. I'm Nathan. Go look at your routine.